Hello, welcome back to another handheld console video. It's been a little bit since I've done one of these, and today we are taking a look at the Funny Playing GBC, or the Funny Playing Game Boy Color, or the Funny Playing Retro Pixel. It's got quite a few names. I did say I would talk about this during my Analogue Pocket video, which was back in September of last year. Other things just got in the way, but we are finally getting around to it now. Before this video starts, I want to make it completely clear I am not affiliated with Funny Playing. I'm not sponsored by Funny Playing. I paid for this with my own money, and this is my completely honest thoughts and opinions. So yeah, let's crack on. What is the Funny Playing Game Boy Color, or I'm just going to call it the Retro Pixel. The Retro Pixel is an FPGA hardware emulation device, not too dissimilar from something like the Analogue Pocket. There are a few differences, one of the main ones being the size and the shape, and the fact that the Funny Playing Retro Pixel can play original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, but can't play anything past that. It doesn't play Game Boy Advance or anything else. One of the other caveats about this is you can buy this as a complete put together device, but one of the coolest things, one of the things I really liked about this, you can put it together yourself. It's cheaper to do that, it's pretty easy to do, and there are a ton of customization options. I'll leave a link to Funny Playing's website in the description for this specific device, where you can have a look at all of the different customization options. I did film myself putting this thing together months ago, so I'll cut in some footage of that if it's relevant. But yeah, you can pick the color of screen lens, you can pick the color of shell, you can pick the color of the buttons, the membranes behind the buttons. As you can see, I don't know if you can see too well, but I went with a white PCB, you can see under there. I went with a blue, or is this like the green, bluey green? I think it's green, I think it's meant to be green, like mint. UV reactive shell. It does actually react to UV light, glows in the dark. I'll put some footage in of that. Went for white membranes, white buttons, white screen lens. You only get the choice of black or white screen lens. There's not that many screen lens colors. And then there's some cool holographic stickers on the back, and then you get a USB-C battery as well. Putting this thing together was pretty simple. There's no soldering, it's just plugging in some cables, screwing some screws, and plugging in some plugs. There are a few things to watch out for though. This screw here in the shell does have a tendency to crack, so when you're screwing this one in, you do have to be careful with it. When I plugged the battery in the first time, I got like a weird combination of lights on the LED down here for the charging port, and I checked the manual, the instruction manual, and it did actually tell me that it was because the battery wasn't seated properly, so I unplugged it, reseated it, and it worked just fine. I think the thing that gave me the most hassle was getting this screen in. So to get the screen in, I'm sure you'll be able to see in the video that I'll put up now, you've kind of got to tuck this inside the shell and then lay it down. The only problem is the ribbon cable gets caught on some of the pins on the PCB, so it wasn't like dropping in. It should just drop in, you shouldn't have to push. So it took me a couple of tries to get that in, and I can see that being a bit of a struggle for some people who've never done something like that before, worrying about maybe damaging the ribbon cable. Just take your time, be patient, it will go in eventually. Yeah, that was probably the biggest struggle I had putting this thing together, but other than that, it is pretty simple. I don't remember them providing screwdrivers. If they did, I'll put a note on the bottom of the screen, but just bear in mind as well, these are tri-wing screws. These are not typical screws, but I do have a screwdriver kit that comes with tri-wing, so it wasn't really that much of an issue to me. The size of it is literally 1-to-1 a Game Boy Color shell. Obviously there are some minor differences. Obviously the screen is a bit nicer than this one. Just there it says Nintendo, and down here you can see it says Retro Pixel. Obviously you can see this one's missing the battery port. This one's got a lithium ion battery, and on the bottom, instead of a DC jack on the Retro Pixel, we have a USB-C charger. On this side, just standard on-off switch, and then on this side we've got the I guess you like the communication port. This has a volume wheel, But this is sort of like a volume nub where it just kind of flicks. I don't know if you can see that very well. It kind of flicks up and down. It doesn't scroll. Right, so let me actually get into the meat of this device. Obviously, you can see it's got a very, very, very nice, I believe it's an IPS panel. Again, similar to something like the Analogue Pocket, which I will be comparing it to a little bit later in the video, because that's going to be a lot of people's comparisons for this device. You got this really nice, big, crystal clear, pixel perfect, really nice colors screen. I don't really have any complaints for it. It's definitely not as good as the Analogue Pocket. I might be able to show that later in the video. On the side here, we've got the volume switch. I will turn up the volume a little bit. It does get quite loud. That's just from this one little speaker. It sounds good enough. Obviously, it's not going to be amazing quality from a device such as this. There's no indicator of if the volume's going up and down other than just the loudness, the auditory level. So you've just kind of got to mess with it until it's quiet or maxed out. However, benefit over the Analogue Pocket, if you push this in, mine's a little bit finicky, you get a little OSD menu. So you control this with the D-pad. You've got a backlight bar, so you can easily change the backlight. You've got a volume bar, which it isn't gonna do anything until I press save. You've got display mode, so you've got full edge-to-edge display mode. You've got 4x emulation. You've got 4x emulation with some like scan lines. You've got 2 cores. You've got Game Boy Color and then your original Game Boy core. These don't switch automatically. You do have to switch these yourself if you switch to playing an original Game Boy game. Although you can just also keep it on the Game Boy Color core and it should play original Game Boy games just fine. I think you just get some different palette if you play it on the Game Boy core. And I think there's like some compatibility issues as well with certain games. You have to play them on certain cores. You got different palettes. They don't work on Game Boy Color mode. I'll show you them a bit later. Compatibility issue fixes, I just keep these turned off. You've got game speed, which you can turn up a little bit, which I find quite useful as a shiny hunter. Right now I am doing a shiny hunt in Pokemon Crystal for my badge quest. So when I am playing on this device, I have the speed maxed out to just get that little bit of extra speed for those random encounters. And then you also have your version number and your battery just there. So here we've got the Pokemon Yellow playing right now. This is on the Game Boy Color core, so obviously the game is going to be in full color. So yeah, as you can see in the Game Boy Color core, it's not too dissimilar from something you'd see on the Analogue Pocket. You've got your full color mode and it does look really, really nice on this screen. Oh, we've got a Metapod. But I'll switch over to the Game Boy core now. So to do this, you've got to open up the menu, switch it over to Game Boy core, click save, and then you've got to reset the console. That's just a little bit, it's a little bit of an inconvenience, but it's not a huge deal. It's not a deal breaker. So here on the Game Boy core, you've got the original monochrome look of the DMG. And here you can actually change your color palette options depending on your preference. It doesn't really matter which one you pick. Just whichever one you prefer, really. But yeah, in terms of actually playing the games, it's completely perfect. I have had one issue, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but I did manage to fix it fairly easily. But yeah, I mean, I've been playing through Pokemon Crystal on this thing. If you've been watching my Crystal Badge Quest, go check out the series. I'll leave a link in the description. I've had no issues with this thing. I've really been liking it. But yeah, let me talk about a couple of very minor issues I've been having with this thing. So I've brought up this screen just for a little bit of a demonstration. Obviously, done this as a sort of recreation. When I first bought this, I updated the firmware, which is really simple to do. All you do is you make sure there's no game inside, plug the USB-C into your computer, go onto the Funny Playing website, download the latest update, and once you switch the console on when it's plugged into your computer, it will appear as a drive on your computer. Drag and drop the update file and it just does it automatically. The current release, the latest release, I believe is 1.14. I updated to that, and I was playing Pokemon Crystal and I was doing some soft resets for a shiny Totodile at the time, and every so often, every 5 minutes, every so many resets, the game would hard crash and then reboot in the Game Boy core and it would come up with this screen. This is why I brought this screen up. I did a little bit of Googling and I saw one or two people on a Reddit thread having a similar issue with Pokemon Crystal, but luckily it's not irreversible. All you have to do is download a previous update file, drag it back onto the console, and it'll backdate it. It's really simple. So as you can see on my version number, I'm on 1.08, which I found to be the most stable version. Your mileage may vary, but that's just an issue I ran into. I know a lot of the most recent updates are more for very specific games or emulation packs like the Omega carts and stuff like that. Like the Game Boy carts have like the SD card slot, so you can put ROMs on it. So let me give this a bit of a comparison to the Analogue Pocket. Obviously right here with the Analogue Pocket here, my white Analogue Pocket that you've probably seen the video on if you're watching this video. Obviously there's quite a big size difference, not just with the screens but also the console itself. As I say, this is pretty much one-to-one a Game Boy Color shell. If you've held a Game Boy Color or seen a Game Boy Color, it is exactly the same almost. I think internally it is a little bit different just to accommodate the slightly different PCB and screen. I will say it doesn't really come across much on camera, but the colors on the Analogue Pocket are slightly better than the RetroPixel. You can kind of see it's got more of like a greeny tint. I do prefer the screen on the Analogue Pocket, but some things are missing from this compared to the Analogue Pocket. So the Analogue Pocket can obviously play Game Boy, original Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance, and with the adapters it can play a multitude of other physical cartridges. This just plays Game Boy and Game Boy Color. It doesn't play anything else. It plays physical Game Boy and Game Boy Color cartridges as well as some flash cards, but it does not play Game Boy Advance and it doesn't play anything from any other system. The hardware inside is completely original hardware, but it is just the hardware emulation of a Game Boy Color, like that's it. Another benefit of the Analogue Pocket is obviously you have the SD card slot, so you can use the open FPGA software, which is funnily enough how I'm playing this copy of Crystal to show them side by side. So you can play ROMs, backed up ROMs, fan games, other consoles that can't physically go into this console. This does not have that. You cannot put ROMs onto this thing directly. There is no micro SD card slot. This is just purely for physical games. I think overall in terms of the comfortability, they're both pretty comfortable. The Analogue Pocket is a bit more square, a bit more, not exactly sharp, but a bit more blunt on the corners, but it's still very comfortable to hold. It is a little bit heavy, but not something that's going to make you completely fatigued. This, however, is like super comfortable. Again, if you've played a Game Boy Color, it's exactly like a Game Boy Color. It is one-to-one hand feel, and I really like playing this. It's also a bit lighter. It's more pocketable than the Analogue Pocket, ironically. If I was going to take one of these out on the go, maybe for a day trip and do some hunting on the way, I would probably be more likely to gravitate towards this, in all honesty. Something else I forgot to mention in terms of hardware, you do obviously have the suspend feature, the pause and suspend, the suspend and unsuspend feature on your cartridges with this, whereas this, again, it acts almost identical to a Game Boy Color, where if you want to stop playing, you'll just have to save and turn it off. There is no suspend feature to talk of. On the back as well, something the RetroPixel has, personally, I think, over this. Obviously, the Analogue Pocket doesn't have much protection for the cartridges because it has to accommodate the adapters for the other consoles it can play games from, whereas the RetroPixel, again, it's basically just like a Game Boy Color. The cart is fully protected and it has no chance of coming loose and falling out. Even though that isn't an issue that I personally experienced with the Analogue Pocket, it does just give you a bit more peace of mind with the RetroPixel. And then obviously there are just some hardware differences in terms of the buttons. This one obviously has 2 more buttons to accommodate the other consoles, of course, and it has the back bumpers for, you know, Game Boy Advance, etc. But this doesn't play those, so I'm not really going to hold it to it, in all honesty. Other things, in terms of battery life, I do notice that this does, I usually get about 3 or 4 hours out of it if I'm hunting all day. It's not too bad. The Analogue Pocket does have a much bigger battery and lasts a lot longer. But they're both USB-C charging. They charge fairly quickly. You can charge them with any USB-C cable. But overall, in terms of comparisons, I do think these are obviously similar in many ways, but they're obviously also very different in many ways, and it would depend on your circumstance as to which one you would want to go with. Are you someone who has a vast collection of many different gaming consoles, handheld gaming consoles that go beyond Nintendo, and do you like to play backups of your own games? Do you like to play fan ROMs? Do you like to play games outside of handheld gaming, the Analogue Pocket would probably be more of your go-to, but bear in mind this is almost double the price of this, which I forgot to mention actually. Should have mentioned that earlier. This, to buy all the parts for it, I think it was around £90, maybe a bit less. I'll put a screenshot on right now. Or you can pay a little bit more and have it pre-assembled for you for people who don't have the confidence to put together something like that yourself. But obviously that difference in price does come with a difference in features. Again, as I said in my Analogue Pocket video, I really don't think that this is worth the money for what it is. I think if you're someone who just wants to re-experience these old games, you'd be better off just buying like a Miu Mini or like an Anbernic device and just playing ROMs basically. These are devices mainly for people with physical collections. But yeah, overall, just in terms of my comparison with the Analogue Pocket, like I said, they're two very different devices in my mind. But if I was to pick one, I would probably go with the Retro Pixel, just because it is a lot cheaper. You get all the different customization options, and if you're someone who has a large physical collection of Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, this is going to go a long way. It's basically just a modern day Game Boy Color. That's the best way to describe it. It's a Game Boy Color. If it came out today, that's the definition of a modern day Game Boy Color, God. But yeah, the Analogue Pocket is sort of like the iPhone of Game Boy Colors. It's the premium where the price tag doesn't really match the features that you get, in all honesty. Although I do still like the Analogue Pocket, don't get me wrong. If you held a gun to my head and asked me to pick, it would be the Retro Pixel any day. If you did have a Game Boy Advance collection, which I do, I'd probably say, because this was about £90, I would probably say take the rest of, so this is about 200, I paid about £250 for this, 200, £250, I can't remember exactly. I would take the rest of that money, buy a used original Game Boy Advance and mod it with an IPS kit, which are about £30 to £40, and I would have that. So yeah, if I was working on limited options or a limited budget, this would be my setup for Game Boy handhelds. I would have the Retro Pixel for my original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, and then a modded original Game Boy Advance or Game Boy SP, it's your choice. These are just a bit cheaper for all my Game Boy Advance games. I would far prefer this setup, even though it's two separate devices, over this, just because Game Boy Advance on this, obviously it does have its flaws. It has the two big black bars, but it's like an all-in-one console. So again, I'd love to hear what you guys think in the comments. Let me know like what you would prefer. Also, I've touched something on there that's changed the tint of the screen. I'd love to know what you guys think. What would be your ideal setup? Would you prefer to have two separate devices, or would you prefer to just have the Analogue Pocket? Let me know in the comments. Right, let me wrap up this video, and hopefully I can sum it up in some kind of a coherent way, because I really don't think I've done this video very well. But I also thought that about my Analogue Pocket video, and now it's like my most successful video on the channel, so thank you all for that. Thanks for enjoying my ramblings. So the Funny Playing Retro Pixel, or the FPGBC, or the Funny Playing Game Boy Color, what are my thoughts overall on this thing? I really like it. As I said earlier, it's probably my go-to over the Analogue Pocket if I'm playing Pokemon Crystal for my badge quest any day. Mainly just because of the simplicity, the portableness, the feel of it. It basically is exactly the same as a Game Boy Color, as I've said. I just prefer the convenience of it, and also it kind of helps with the fact that it's a lot cheaper. So if it got stolen, I wouldn't be as heartbroken as if my Analogue Pocket got stolen, which I have had my Game Boy Advance SP stolen in the past. Go watch the Safari Week video. But yeah, would I recommend this device? Absolutely. I would recommend this any day for someone who has a vast Game Boy and Game Boy Color collection. Even if you play all your games on flash carts, again, it's still worth it just for that authentic feel. It's probably more expensive to buy a Game Boy Color and then mod it. And I also believe that most Game Boy Color mods require some kind of soldering. I don't know if there's any solderless kits out there yet. This kit requires no soldering. It can be a bit finicky, as I did mention earlier, but you can also just buy the kit pre-made for a couple of extra quid or a couple of extra bucks. You can still have all the different customization options that they do have on the Funny Playing website. I love it. It's fantastic. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this video, despite how rambly it probably has been. watching. Let me know in the comments what would be your setup, or what is your setup. And also feel free to like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I do want to say a big thank you again for all the support on the Analogue Pocket video. It's now got like 10,000 views, which I never expected that video to do so well. Like I said, when I was making it, I felt like I was rambling way too much. Again, I also want to mention quickly, Game Boy Operator is also an option. This would be an option mainly for people who would like to capture their games for stuff like streaming, and also backing up and restoring save files and such, because this doesn't really do any of that, but neither does the Analogue Pocket, in all honesty. You can dock the Analogue Pocket and capture the game through that, but you have to buy the dock separately, which is why I didn't mention it in my original video, because I was reviewing the device as itself, none of its accessories. But if you want something for more like capturing games and stuff, again, Game Boy Operator is the way to go. And Epilogue have also just announced their SNES operator as well. I believe that's up for pre-order now, so fingers crossed they crack on with that DS operator as well. I remember them talking about that a while ago. But yes, let me wrap up this video real quick. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I'm sorry it took so long to get this video made. Have a good time in whatever you're doing. Keep gaming and handheld gaming and all that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Happy New Year as well. Bye bye.